Hello class, my name is Addison and today I will be presenting about Unit 731. Unit 731 was a biological warfare unit that operated during the Second World War and the beginning of the Second Sino-Japanese War. This unit is infamous due to the dehumanizing experiments done to individuals in hopes of advancing biological warfare and learning about the human body. For starters, I chose this topic because I believe that biological warfare is a tool that, if utilized incorrectly, could absolutely wipe out humankind. For those of you who are unfamiliar with biological warfare is when infectious agents such as bacteria or toxins are purposely used in order to harm living things. This has been seen many times in history, from early forms such as when colonizers would purposely infect Native Americans with pathogens such as smallpox, to more sophisticated forms during the 1900s such as Unit 731 or Unit 1855. I think that this is a really interesting topic, especially when it comes to Unit 731, because compared to any other cases of biological warfare I have learned about, Unit 731 is the most shocking. I wanted to select this as my topic so I could not only deepen my understanding, but also share my findings with the class. So, from this, a research question begins to arise. What types of experiments were employed, as well as what consequences Japan ensued following the disbandment of this unit? From this, I struggled to come up with a solid thesis statement that communicated what I wanted to focus on in my paper. My original thesis, which was Unit 731 was a major element in Japan's use of biological warfare, utilizing human experimentation in horrifying ways that had lasting effects on the world, was understandably too broad of a statement and therefore needed to be refined. With the help of Professor Berg, I was able to settle on a new statement that is concise enough to get my point across. This statement, which is during World War II, the Imperial Japanese Army's Unit 731 committed war crimes by conducting human experiments to advance biological warfare, is written clearly enough that you can understand what my paper is going to be about, while also eliminating any unnecessary information. For example, in my original thesis, I had mentioned that Unit 731 had lasting effects on the world. However, this goes without saying when talking about a large-scale crime such as this. Now that I have laid out my complex research question and my thesis statement, I will dive into the background information of Unit 731. Taking place in Manchuria, China, this unit experimented on not only Chinese prisoners of war, but also Chinese civilians. Although most of the victims of this unit were from China, there were also some Russian and Korean war prisoners as well. Once prisoners were transferred to the Pingfang facility, which was the main facility of Unit 731, they were referred to by assigned numbers. Unit 731 was disguised as a lumber mill or the Kwangtung Army's Water Purification Bureau to the local population, and due to this cover, staff would refer to prisoners as maruta, which means wooden logs in Japanese. Now, you may be wondering, how are programs such as these even allowed to happen? Well, following World War I movements against biological and chemical warfare, the Geneva Protocol was put into place in 1925, which would limit the use of biological and chemical weapons in times of war. At the time of its creation, 38 states signed it, with Japan opting against it. Because of this, programs such as Unit 731 were able to be created because they were not bound by the protocol. Because Japan's Imperial Army had conquered many areas including the northeastern China and later the Philippines and Guam, the army decided to set up a puppet state in Manchuria and began biological weapon research. General Shiro Ishii led this project in hopes of creating biological weapons that could be employed in the war. Heinous experiments were done on these humans, from undergoing various surgeries without anesthesia, forcefully injecting people with pathogens such as anthrax or cholera, and impregnating women just to monitor the progression of these diseases in the fetus. One of Ishii's most successful bioweapons was a flea bomb, which dropped porcelain bombs filled with plague-infested fleas on the city of Ningpo, killing hundreds of civilians. He discovered that fleas were ideal because they could survive the long fall from an aircraft. Ishii and fellow researchers believed that their actions were justified because if these prisoners were to die at the hands of the Imperial Japanese Army anyways, why not let it be for the progression of the medical world? There were some experiments that weren't just to advance biological warfare, but instead to learn things about the human body that could benefit the Imperial Army during the war. The main experiment done in this aspect was to learn about frostbite because of the battles between the Soviets and the Imperial Japanese in cold weather. Performed by psychologist Yoshimura Hitsaru, prisoners would have their hands dipped in cold water and stand out in the winter cold for long periods of time. Researchers would then test different methods to treat the frostbite. If ice had formed on the limb, the researchers would chip it away and pour warm water over the area, then hit said limb with the club to find out if it was still frozen solid. The gravity of this unit is truly not something to be underestimated. Hundreds of thousands of people died as a result of Unit 731. Although unbelievable atrocities were committed by this unit, the United States granted immunity to key figures within Unit 731, including General Shiro Ishii, in exchange for access to their research. In fact, General Shiro Ishii became a successful and renowned surgeon in Japan up until his death in 1959. The data collected from the experiments revolutionized the medical world. However, it wasn't until rather recently that the means of collecting this data got revealed to the world. In the 1980s, Japanese researchers and former members of the Army began speaking out about what went down in Unit 731. Following this, documents related to Japanese war crimes and Unit 731 specifically were declassified, allowing academic articles to be created about it. This leads me into my next point, how I actually collected this information. My process for collecting the research was a little different from my early modern world history topic process. I found that my early modern world history topic, which was about the Ming Dynasty art versus Renaissance art, was much easier to research than Unit 731. There's likely many reasons for this, including the immunity deal struck up by America that left the horrors of this facility under wraps until the 1980s. Another reason could be the broad category of each period, so the Ming Dynasty period and the Renaissance period, compared to the very specific topic of Unit 731. Whatever the reason, it made finding information about Unit 731 very difficult. After reflecting on my research done in my Ming and Renaissance art paper, I decided that I wanted to start my research through Credo Reference. This is because this database offers tertiary sources, which are great for general information, which I can then find subtopics to do more in-depth research about. However, after searching up Unit 731 or anything related to Japan's use of biological weapons, little to no results came up. The same went for many other tertiary sources, such as the Modern World History Database. Because of this, I had to start with sources packed with complex information and work my way backwards. For example, I found one source on Galen Context titled Japan's Unit 731 Program that talked about the reason why Japan was actually able to develop these facilities, which was because of the Geneva Protocol. From there, I went back to Credo Reference and looked up Geneva Protocol and gathered information about it. This process was applied for several subtopics regarding this unit, including the definitions of some of the bacteria that were experimented with, including cholera and the plague. I found that many of the sources I used were not focused on Unit 731 or bioweapons by Japan specifically. Instead, they were about the use of biological warfare throughout many countries and included Imperial Japan's Army Unit 731 as a subtopic. This meant that I had to do a lot of sifting through the sources in order to find exactly what I needed. Some modes of comparison I employed within my research were change over time, compare and contrast, and cause and effect. For change over time, I talked about how Unit 731 began by targeting local populations and staying in a relatively contained area. However, over time, the biological weapon was implemented in entire cities. For comparing and contrasting, I talked about how although Unit 731 is the most infamous unit in Japanese history, there are other units created by Japan that utilize biological warfare. For example, Unit 1644, which occurred in Nanjing, China, had similar practices regarding biological warfare and human experimentation. Although the subject size was smaller, Yoshiro Onidata would lethally inject his subjects with chloroform following the experiments, similar to how Ishii and Unit 731 would inject their victims with chloroform if the pathogens they received were too dangerous. What I mean by this is if the risks outweighed the rewards and the test subjects ended up putting other subjects and researchers at risk, they would be killed with the chloroform. This is also the case if the subject was not providing useful information and they were going to die regardless due to the pathogen. For cause and effect, I talked about the consequences members of Unit 731 received following the defeat of Imperial Japan in World War II. This project has opened my eyes because I realized that although I may have assignments that have the same exact criteria, expectations, and format, I may have to approach my research process completely differently. For example, in this project, I had to divulge into many specific topics regarding one particular topic, while in my previous project about Ming and Renaissance art, I did not have to go so in depth because I was dealing with two completely different periods and comparing them. Overall, though, I am very pleased with my research process because even though it was a challenge for me, I was able to overcome it and find exactly what I was looking for. Alright, well, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much, guys, for listening, and I hope that you found my topic as interesting as I think it is.